Okay, shall I start? Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. Today, we are joining our Academy of Public Administrations under the Presidency of the Republic of Kazakhstan. My name is Aygul Kusherbayeva. I'm a Deputy Director of this Academy. And today, within the framework of usual development days, which we provide in our Academy, we are delighted to introduce you a webinar theme, which will focus on a two-pronged theme: the United Nations Program on Public Administrations, which means citizens' participations in the context of 2030 Agenda implementations. And I am really appreciate that our partner in face of Garigin Manukyan, who is a Senior Governance and Public Administrator Officer of ANDISA, to help us to organize this very important webinar. And I am really appreciated for joining us, today's speakers. We have three speakers for today's sessions: Dr. ДЖОН-МЭРИ KAUZIYA, who is a Chief of Public Service Innovation Branch in ANDISA, and Dr. ДЕМЕТРИОС ARGIRIADES, who is a Doctor Honoris Causa of both the University of Athens and the Pensions University of Political Science. And actually, you are welcome for today's sessions. And Professor Adil Khan, who is also the Professor of the Development Practice in the School of the Social Science, University on Queensland, and he is from Australia. And actually, for today's webinar, we are going to introduce you with the contribution of United Nations Program of Public Administrations to Sustainable Development. And let me start to today's sessions. Each speaker has 10 minutes. And of course, dear listeners who are joining us through the Facebook, you have an opportunity to ask your question through the Facebook. I'm immediately to transfer these questions to our speakers. And if you would like, just you can join in for the discussions through the Facebook, of course. And let me start with today's speakers. And the first floor, I am going to take to Mr. Garigin Manukyan. Garigin, I'm glad to see you for today's Zoom sessions. And actually, your speech is about the contributions of United Nations Program on Public Administrations to Sustainable Development. The floor is yours, please. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Aygul, very much. But the thing is that Dr. KAUZIYA has a welcoming remarks, which is he was going to deliver before me. This is in line with the program.
I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. I just go in. So Dr. KAUZIYA, please, the floor is yours. You have a welcoming remarks for today's speech. Please, John KAUZIYA. Something is wrong?
Very much. Thank you
okay.
very much.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes, here it's very much in the evening. Thank you very much, our moderator, Dr. Agur Kashibayeva. I hope I am not spoiling your name. I'm very happy to see you. And very many people I would have loved to meet in person. Professor Adil Khan and Professor DEMETRIOS ARGIRIADES, my former colleagues and eternal friends. I'm very, very glad and really appreciative that you have joined us in this. Thank you, Gary, for your organization, and our colleague, Dennis, I have seen him. I would really want to start by thanking the Academy of Public Administration under the Presidency of the Republic of Kazakhstan for initiating this webinar. This event is only one among many others that the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government of UNDESA has organized with the Academy in close collaboration and cooperation with the Astana Civil Service Hub. I'm sure that this cooperation that had been tested by quite some time will continue and bring to us many more positive results for the benefit of public services in Kazakhstan and beyond. As you are probably well aware, recently in the year 2020, the 75th anniversary of the United Nations was widely commemorated in the whole world. I'm sure would have been very much together and very much aware if it hadn't been for the current pandemic that has locked us in one place, each of us. And so I would like to personally thank Rector Yernaba Abil for extending a congratulatory note to our division in connection with this important milestone in the life of the United Nations as a global body. Having said this, I would like to invite your attention to the fact that only 3 years later, that is after 1945, the United Nations Program on Public Administration, Finance and Development was established by the UN General Assembly. This is just to underscore the importance that all member states at that time, and indeed up to today, of the UN have been attaching to the field of public administration, because it is the driver of most activities concerning development. Given that our division is a custodian of the United Nations Program on Public Administration, particularly positioned to promote sound public administration in the Republic of Kazakhstan. One of the prominent ideas that today we will discuss and learn about will be the question of the 73rd years old history of the UN program in public administration. I think you may well remember that during the Almaty workshop in November 2019, the participants were familiarized and extensively discussed the principles of effective governance for sustainable development that were developed by the United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration. 5 principles out of the 11 address inclusiveness, leaving no one behind, non-discrimination, participation, subsidiarity, and intergenerational equity. This fact alone indicates the critical role of participatory governance and wide partnerships in promoting development and attaining the SDGs. And indeed, the current pandemic and the struggle to overcome it, especially in search of a vaccine and sharing it among all peoples of the world, including the poorest, underscores the criticality of participatory governance and partnership in the development of the whole world. The notion of inclusion also touches on distributive justice. Leaving no one behind must mean that neither burdens nor privileges can be very unevenly spread in society. This is one of the lessons that humanity at large, but some countries more than others have learned from the pandemic. Therefore, the second idea that we will deal with today during this webinar will be devoted to citizen engagement in the process of sustainable development. I think 1 hour is not a lot of time, so I will at this point request you to allow me to conclude and wish all of you very fruitful and healthy year ahead, and very beneficial deliberation during this webinar, which I have been very happy to associate myself with. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kayuzi. So, and for your welcoming remarks. And I do remember that in November 2019, we met in the very, very important event, which was held in Almaty. And of course, at that seminars, we discussed a lot of questions concerning the sustainable development and how and what is the role of the institutions as, like our academy, some other universities, in the promotion and towards for the sustainable development, because we know that the only international organizations, they have to be supported by the missions of the government institutions and the missions of the universities and other non-governmental organizations. And that is why today's webinar, it's also pay attention, or I have to say stress attention for the activity of the civil servants and the activity of the universities and the academy, like our academy, towards for the sustainable developments, because now we live in the VUCA world, and we know that actually everyone depends on the external circumstances, but external circumstances can be led and can be managed by yourself, and this is very important. So, and now I'm going to give a floor to our very, very important strategic partner, Garigin Manukian. The floor is yours. And just have to say that Garigin, he is a senior governance and public administrations officer of the United Nations divisions. Please, Garigin, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Kosherbayeva. Dear friends and colleagues, since we are still in January, allow me to start by wishing you a healthy and productive New Year free of COVID. I am going to briefly introduce the United Nations Program on Public Administration, and it is clear that in few minutes it will not be possible to speak about such an important international initiative that is more than 70 years old. But I will try to reflect on major milestones that the program has achieved during its existence. Since its creation in 1945, the United Nations has been concerned not only with the maintenance of peace and security, but also with the promotion of economic and social development. At the very beginning of the history of the UN, special emphasis was placed on the needs of developing countries, especially those emerging from colonial rule. They required special assistance in building their government institutions and in training public officials in a number of key capacities. The specific role of the UN Secretariat in providing technical assistance to governments in public administration received its first legislative mandate by the General Assembly in Resolution 246, adopted in December of 1948. This date is thus officially recognized as the beginning of the UN Program on Public Administration. And the Division of Public Institutions and Digital Government of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DPIDG, where all presenters of today are working or were working at some point, was entrusted with the implementation of this program. Since its inception, the Program on Public Administration has consistently assisted member states to promote sound public administration that supports sustainable and equitable political, economic, and social development of all nations. However, during its life, the program had to evolve and adapt to changing global priorities and needs of developing countries. In order to ensure coordination of system-wide activities in the area of public administration and design and implement specific technical cooperation activities tailored to the needs of member states, in 1953, the General Assembly approved a revised program on public administration. By this resolution, the GA created the comprehensive program responsible for research, analysis, training, exchange of knowledge, and technical assistance in public administration that has lasted for more than 70 years and is still operating today. One of the major achievements of the program in the 1950s was the creation of national and regional public administration centers responsible for providing training and capacity building to public officials. The United Nations was instrumental in establishing the Brazilian School of Public Administration in Rio, in strengthening the Public Administration Institute of Turkey, and in establishing national public administration centers, to name a few, in Argentina, Myanmar, Colombia, Egypt, El Salvador, Iran, Nepal, and so on. For several years, the General Assembly and the Economic and Social Council provided general policy directions to the program on an ad hoc basis, though, through their resolutions. However, it became necessary to provide more technical and substantive guidance to steer the activities of the program. Therefore, in 1967, the group of experts of the United Nations Program on Public Administration was established. The group met on a biennial basis to review the activities of the program and to make recommendations on its future directions. In 2001, the group was converted into a full-fledged subsidiary body of the ECOSOC and renamed United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration, meeting on an annual basis. The first meeting of the committee in 2002 was devoted to the theme enhancing the capacity of public administration to implement the United Nations Millennium Declaration. This agenda would inspire the work of the program for the following 15 years. Another very important milestone in the history of the program was the landmark Resolution 50/225, adopted by the General Assembly in 1996. This resolution re-established the awareness of the centrality of public administration in development by stressing that effectiveness of government requires an efficient and effective public administration in all countries that are responsive to the needs of the people, promote social justice, ensure universal access to quality services, and create an enabling environment for sustainable people-centered development. To fulfill its new and expanded mandate, the program viewed the role of the state in the wider context of governance, addressing thus all institutions and mechanisms involved in the formulation of public policies and in the provision of public goods. The new and revitalized program developed a multi-pronged strategy along the following lines: institutionalization of the intergovernmental discussion on public administration, development of quality analytical and policy tools, promotion of innovation and best practices in governance and public administration, promotion of knowledge and information sharing, building a common understanding on emerging governance and public administration issues, assistance to interested governments in public sector capacity building. Let me state that this strategy is still valid today. And now allow me to briefly introduce to you the flagship outputs that our division developed following this very strategy. In 2001, the program launched the World Public Sector Report, a unique publication that provides policymakers, scholars, and civil society at large with relevant research findings, information and data on emerging questions related to the public sector. Given the number of countries embarking in the development of e-government, the program launched a project of reviewing the progress made in all UN member countries and developed the Index of E-Government Readiness. This index has become the most useful tool utilized by policymakers and researchers around the world. The results of the annual analysis of e-government development at the country level are featured in the biennial issue of the UN e-government survey. To encourage and reward innovation in public administration in member countries, the ECOSOC in the year 2000 endorsed a recommendation of the program to establish the United Nations Public Service Award, a competition open to all organizations implementing innovative practices. This is the most prestigious international competition rewarding creativity, responsiveness, and the excellence in public service. The awards are bestowed every year on or around June 23, that, as you most probably know, upon recommendation of the Secretary General, was designated by the General Assembly as the United Nations Public Service Day. That happened in 2002. In order to promote the access to and the exchange of information and documentation on public administration among countries, the program created a global internet platform, the United Nations Public Administration Network, UNPAN, which links international, regional, and national organizations working in the field. If I am not mistaken, the Academy is also a member of UNPAN. Let me conclude by affirming that since the adoption of the Sustainable Development Agenda in 2015 by all 193 member states of the United Nations, all the activities of the program under the major operational lines have been focused on providing assistance to public administration in developing countries in the implementation of the SDGs. And as Dr. KAUZIYA mentioned, our workshop, which was organized in Almaty in 2019, showed that it was focused on, it was within that approach, basically. Public administration in the years to come will continue to be the main instrument of the state to define policies, to implement programs, and to ensure the security, safety, and quality services are provided to all its citizens. Therefore, I am sure that cooperation between the Academy and the PIDG is doomed to be a long-term productive endeavor. Thank you very much. I think I made it in 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Derek. Yeah, you definitely made it in 10 minutes. So, and actually we do understand that it's very important. And one of the important role which we are going to take into consideration, this is the capacity building, because without the capacity building, without the introducing the most people, not only the civil servants, but some just simple citizens, just because we are living in the world. And actually, it's very important to distribute information, to provide some explanations, what is the main missions of the sustainable development and how we can get to the sustainable developments. And actually, we do understand that without the very important role and impact made from the public administrations, we cannot achieve this goal. And now let me turn to the next speakers. And why do? Because Professor Adil Khan, he is going to tell us the citizens' engagements for CGS. Please, sustainable development goals just cannot be achieved with the citizens' engagements. And Professor Adil Khan provide us explanations, or maybe just you will share with us your experience, how we can involve the citizens for the achievements of the sustainable development goals. Please, the floor is yours, Professor Adil Khan.
Thank you. I hope you guys can hear me. And greetings from Australia. and good wishes. I wouldn't say good morning or good afternoon. Good wishes to all of you. And very good to see some old colleagues and friends. And also I'm very grateful to Gary Manacoen for giving me this opportunity. I'm also grateful to the Academy for giving this floor, the platform to discuss this very important issue. I would be using my PowerPoint and see if I fail. Your technology is wonderful, but sometimes you don't win them. If I fail, I'll do verbally. Okay, so let me see. I can share the screen.
Failure is okay. Yeah.
Let me see. So can you, is it all right?
Yeah, it's visible.
Is it
Yeah,
clear?
everything is okay, please.
Great, terrific.
You can
Okay.
continue.
Okay, so basically, oh, it's not moving. Okay, so the way I would like to make my presentation, it is three, four parts. One is that we'd like to discuss a little bit about the whole issues and concepts and thoughts, what we had earlier in terms of defining and conceptualizing development. And then what led that to SDGs? What does it mean? Because if you are not clear about these thoughts and ideas, we may not be able to actually make the correct decisions. And then I would also like to explain the rationale, the connection between SDGs and citizen engagement, and what does it mean and what are the implications. And finally, I did some very preliminary research on Kazakhstan. So I would talk a little bit about Kazakhstan's context, its progress in SDGs, and the areas of citizen engagement for Kazakhstan. And then I will discuss way forward. So that's how I'd like to organize my presentation. So let's be very clear. Like until recently, till SDGs came out, we always thought economic growth is development. But we realized that economic growth alone cannot contribute to development. These are two very different concepts. Economic growth can complement development, but economic growth by itself is not development. Not only that, economic growth can even compromise development. For example, it can accompany inequality. You can see many societies have done wonderful economically, but there have been rising inequality in those societies, rising fractions, fragmentations, exclusions. And secondly, economic growth, if unchecked, can also contribute to degradation of environment and even contribute to moral decay. And this we have seen in many countries. So development actually means advancing society, both economically and socially, but more importantly, equitably, inclusively, and sustainably. So that's what SDGs mean. It's a new framework of development. So when you look at SDGs, these are not some material gains that we have to make. We are actually looking up transformation of the societies, purely from materialistic idea of society to a more moral society. That is what we are looking at. So SDGs, when you compact them together, is actually a mandate for building good societies. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by good societies? And this is exactly where the whole idea of UN and government comes in, because economic growth does not need government. It can happen on its own. No one has to do anything. But when you bring in government, that's when we need government to do development, to balance economic growth in a way so that they contribute to social enrichment, to moral nourishment, and also to equity and sustainability, etc. So let us be very clear that we are making a very important shift from the earlier notion and idea of development to a very new notion and idea of development. And this is completely unknown to many people, including us academics. So this is the first understanding that we have to have. Why, what is SDGs? SDGs is not a balance sheet of few indicators that you have to achieve. It is transformation of a society. And that's what we have to keep in mind. So where does the idea of citizen participation comes in into the implementation of SDGs? Why it is so important? To me, after doing some research, I realized at two levels. One is the intellectual level. As I said, there is a need for a shift in thinking what development is all about. So you need to have that shift. And how do you do it? First of all, the entire country, all the citizens, government, the intellectual community, the civil society must understand and be aware of the SDGs, what they mean. So there is a need for kind of a campaign to reach the message of SDGs out to the people. So that's the first linkage, citizen engagement that we have to do. Second level is you need to do awareness building through education. Like the academy has a very important role to play, telling people what is it that SDG is all about. And that also most importantly, we need to unlearn a lot of things that we have learned before and learn a new way of looking at development. So there are two levels at the intellectual level. One is awareness building. The other is internalizing the new messages intellectually. That's what is very key. The second issue is the more important issue of how do we implement them, operationalize them. And this is where public administration division, UN, and your academy and other parts of your government can play a very important role. Like the SDGs as a framework should be inclusive development, and this needs inclusiveness, engaging with people, and empowering people to contribute to the process of implementation of SDGs. So there are two levels we are talking about. One is at the intellectual level that we need to make people aware of. And two is operationally, we have to organize our institutions, processes of planning in a way where SDGs can be implemented. And because SDGs is about people, is about society, so you need to put people and society into your planning process, into your implementation process. So what I'm going to do next is share with you how entire, this is exactly how I've said that at two levels what you need to do. Then if you want to operationalize, let me focus on the governance management development. This is how where the planning, budgeting, everything happens. Oh, I'm going. Sorry, I'm going backward. Okay, so if we look at the framework of governance of development management basically means planning and implementation of development programs, policies, etc. Now there are two parts to it. One is called rights component or the political governance component, which basically looks at the political arrangements, the judiciary, the space for civil liberties, civil society, law and order, etc. The other is the development management side, where the planning, implementation, budgeting, service delivery, all these things happen. So I will be mainly focusing on this part, the development management side. We have seen that this is very important. They are both linked with each other, but sometimes even if this part is a little bit weak and take time to develop or improve, this can in isolation continue to make some important changes. So I will mainly be devoting on this part of my program. So this is the framework, the citizen engagement for SDGs, a theoretical framework. I'll be very happy to share my slides later on so that we can have a better look. This probably doesn't look that. Basically, I'm saying that you have 17 goals, then the SDGs are transformative development concept, and what does it mean? And then where citizens can get engaged. So that's the framework that I would be using. So let us talk about citizen engagement initiatives and some examples, okay? For example, I said at the intellectual level, it should start right from school. For example, in Japan, if you go to the school, their politeness is treated or taught to the children right from the beginning. Sensitivities to other people's concerns, difficulties are taught right at the school level. So they grow as sensitive people. They grow as empathizing people. So we cannot suddenly become polite and sensitive and empathizing without having an earlier mindset for it. So the change of mindset in Japan, for example, starts right at the school level. So it is very important that teachings in SDGs, the core messages of SDGs, which is basically empathizing with the difficulties of other people and contributing to improve their conditions or to assist into their difficulties so that they can get better. This kind of mindset must be built right at the beginning from the school level, and which is very important. And also universities. For example, here at the University of Queensland, I conducted few capstone groups, these group studies they do at the undergraduate level. And I gave them few courses, like there was one study on building socially conscious leadership values. It's so interesting that at the end of the whole study, which took about 6 months to do it, they basically got research into socially conscious leaders of various countries and then found out what made them socially conscious and what did they do, how did they succeed. Now, this particular research impacted on the students so much that one of the students, she came up to me one day and said, Professor Khan, I have sacrificed my lunch for last 1 month and money that I have saved, I have contributed it to the fund for the Syrian refugee children education. So that's the kind of change that can happen. And the other thing that must happen at the university level is that we have been brainwashed thinking that economic growth is the answer, but that is not the answer. So we need to be more critical of what we are currently doing and pick out things that are good, pick out things that are not bad. And we talk about SDGs, but tell me how many universities anywhere in the world teach SDGs? Very few. Maybe as a supplementary note or something. I also made another study to look at them that I told them, okay, you guys have understood this is what SDG is. It has 17 goals. Study the university and tell me how far they have implemented SDGs within the university in terms of environmental responsibility, in terms of equity, male, female, professionalism, in terms of student scholarship given. And they came out with a brilliant report. And we found out that university itself is lacking and lagging behind in implementation of SDGs. So there are many models which I can talk about, but what I'm saying is we need to make a shift at the value level. We need to make a shift at the intellectual level. And there the academics, the universities, the civil society, they have a very important role to play. Now, in terms of development management models, there are many models all over the world, and there is Gary was talking about World Public Sector Report. In fact, 2008 World Public Sector Report discusses many models of civic engagement in public governance. So it is clearly shown that those who engage people actually achieve better outcomes in development. First, engaging citizens builds trust in government. And engaging citizens also helps government to prioritize properly and allocate resources accordingly. So it is very, very important. It is good for, it's a win-win situation for people and for government. So it is something that must be done. And of course, there are challenges. It can be complicated. How do you convert consultations into policy inputs? So you need some special skills development for that. And so the capacity building is very, very important in civic engagement, particularly in the public sector. So that's the point that I made here. Now, so the lessons that I want to highlight is that, yes, many countries have done well economically, but they have also problems with equality, social justice, problems with environmental degradation. So bringing back development within the framework of SDGs is absolutely key. And the way to do that is to changing the notion of development at intellectual level. You have to completely, like economic growth should be seen more as a complement to development and not the other way around. Okay, that's very important. Second is the inclusive planning and service delivery system, meaning that citizen engagement in development management is absolutely key. Because if you do not engage, you do not know what they want, what they ask, what their priorities are. So that's very important. And there are ways of doing that. I'm not going into the details of those. I do have those information. There are different models all over the world. We can discuss it later on sometime. And then also, countries that have encouraged citizen engagement at intellectual level and in the process of development management have achieved better results in SDGs. And we have seen that examples from all over the world. So my next slide will be, let us talk about SDGs and Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan's HDI value, Human Development Index, is very high, 0.825. So it's done extremely well. World average is about 0.7 something. So there is no doubt they have done extremely well. Poverty is 0.5%. So there's, in terms of abject poverty, people not having food, shelter, and clothing is not there, more or less. It's zero almost. And gender development is one of the highest, among the developing countries. But there are challenges. And the challenges, these are the challenges, that's what makes SDGs and citizen engagement very important for Kazakhstan. There is relative poverty. Like some people may not be as rich, but some are less rich. And sometimes the gap may be quite big. For example, the measure of inequality is called Gini coefficient. That means if the value is 1, that means one person has got all the income, rest of 0. So higher the value, higher inequality. So the value of Gini coefficient in 2005 was 39.8, which was quite high, But then it came down in 2015, but is rising again. So we have to be very, very conscious of this. How come it is rising again? It should be going down, but it's not. And as we know, also, there are serious regional disparities in terms of access to education, health, and economic development. So, Kazakhstan has done extremely well when you look at the macro figures, but when you disaggregate them, there are challenges, there are difficulties we need to be aware of. And at the moment, Kazakhstan is not an exception, emphasis is on economic growth and not on development. So the emphasis have to shift more to development and see economic growth as a complement to it. And then the planning system is very top-down, very, very centralized system. So there needs to be some element of decentralization at each level of the government. And decentralization does not mean that you give up all the power and authority, but means you share power and authority with citizens, with people, with concerned organizations. And then corruption apparently is quite high. And in a recent survey, at least 17% people have reported that they had to pay a bribe to get services. I would say in comparison to many countries, corruption is not as high as in other countries, but it is still high. And if not checked, it's not properly looked at, it could go out of hand. And Freedom House says that country is not free, but I cannot say much on it because I don't belong there. I haven't done much research into that country. But as I said, some countries have done well, even within the conditions of limited freedom. But as long as you give enough freedom where you make decisions, then it's okay. So that's what you have to look at. So you may not have representative democracy working properly, but if you have participatory democracy working within the public administration, within the public sector, that's when you bring in citizens in real terms to make real decisions. And that should give you a good result. But if you have both, then of course it's very good. So what's the way forward for Kazakhstan? Kazakhstan has done well in terms of economic development, but growing inequality, regional disparity, and social exclusion of some groups indicate that it needs to do more to align the country's advancements along SDGs. This is an important part. Thus, the government of Kazakhstan and its intellectual community need to be made aware of the core values. I'm not talking about indicators, I'm talking about values of SDGs, and initiate relevant measures to make sure that they mainstream and internalize the new notion of development at multiple levels, at community level, at educational level, etc. Reorient the development and management governance processes and make it more participatory, more citizen engaging. And I also believe that institutions like Kazakhstan Academy of Public Administration have a major role to play in advancing these ideas, in making SDGs a reality with active participation of citizens and making changes both at value level and also at intellectual level. So I probably have come to the end of my, so I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Adilkhan. Yeah, please switch off your presentation because actually we have to turn for another speakers. And I do understand that actually you now had mentioned about the two levels of the promotions of citizens' engagement for the sustainable development goals. And I do like that you had mentioned about the intellectual level, which is nowadays actually it's one of the key instruments just to promote within the people, within the citizens, how is big the goal and how is spread the missions of the sustainable development. Because everyone, including me, including our dear listeners, just we are living in this world. And actually, each of us can play a key role for understanding and providing the information. Because not only the questions of the good governance, it's closely related with the citizens' engagement. And this is the key important information which we have to distribute for our listeners today. So thank you very much for your very interesting presentations. Definitely we will share these presentations with our master and the doctorate students because you, as far as you know, or maybe you don't know, so there are some students from our academy just who are really involved for the questions of the economic development and how we can distribute the and how we can engage the citizens with the questions of the sustainable development. And definitely we will share with them these presentations. And now I'm going to give a floor for our next speakers. So Professor Dmitry Argiades, please, he's going to talk about maybe one of the awareness problem for today's world, because we are living in the era of pandemic. So, and everyone is very, very worried. So what is the role of the citizens, and moreover, what is the role of the public administrations? And dear Professor Dmitry, the floor is yours. Please provide us your explanations and your point of view, the public administrations before the pandemic, and which is very important after. It's kind of the forecasting, yes? Please.
Большое спасибо. Let me start by saying thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this very important seminar, which begins, if you like, a new year. We hope that it will lead also to an exit from this pandemic. But the pandemic has revealed a number of facets of public administration, both positive and negative. And this is probably going to be the core of my presentation. You will find a lot more in the paper that my good friend and colleague, Gary Manoukian, has posted and is available to you. And I would like to take this opportunity to invite you, if you have any comments or questions, to feel free to send them to me through email or otherwise, to call me if you wish. You have my telephone number. You have all my coordinates, as they say in French. And I would be very happy to engage you in a discussion in these matters. I thank you also for virtually bring him in contact with old colleagues like Adil Khan and Jon-МЕРИ КАУЗИЯ, who have been friends at the United Nations and beyond for many, many years. We have been together at several conferences in several parts of the world, including, of course, your beautiful country. Thank you again. You know, I'm probably of an age when I can look back on practically all the years when public administration has been a focus of attention at the United Nations, because I joined the United Nations in 1968 after about 8 years of teaching public administration in Britain and Greece, and practicing public administration, administrative reform for 4 or 5 years before I first went to work for the OECD in Paris. You all know that it's a major organization and think tank on economic and social matters, and then the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. When I first joined the Department of Economic and Social Affairs in 1968, it was in fact the 1st of July, many people around the world would not be able to define the subject very clearly. I was, in fact, one of the very few who came in with a degree in public administration, from a master's degree from the London School of Economics. I subsequently took a degree in administrative sciences, sciences administratives, at the Sorbonne. I believe that my good friend Jon-МЕРИ КАУЗИЯ also went and did pretty much the same field of studies. But let us say that the approach to public administration in 1968 and for the next decade or so was fairly classical in terms of two primary concerns. One was institution building, and the other was human resource development. It was not spoken of in terms of human resource development. It was considered primarily, it was described primarily as career development towards the building of a public service profession. The UN inherited from the League of Nations, which, you know, passed on during the Second World War, and the major Western countries, but not only Western countries, a career development structure for the civil service. The idea was that you were recruited on the basis of a general exam, which tested your basic concepts and ideas and learning that you had acquired for lifelong service of the state. It was the idea that also underpinned the creation of National School of Administration in Paris and a series of schools of public administration or institutes of public administration all over the world. My good friend Gary mentioned a few, but there were also regional centers for the development, if you like, of the study of administration. I remember CAFRAD in Tangiers, and in a different context, the East African Railways and Harbors in Nairobi and other parts of Tanzania and Uganda, where basically the main components of public administration were developed. These were also the sections in which the United Nations Division of Public Administration was divided. There was a section for local government, institution building and decentralization. There was a section in personnel administration. Today we speak of it as human resources development, which again mostly did training and institution building in various developing countries. There was a section in organization and methods, mostly attracting engineers from various parts of the world who were considered to have the know-how to build better structures and methods or processes for effective development and administration. And there was a new section of development administration, which tried to convey the principle that administration should not be, as in the past, simply about law and order and about, if you like, running the affairs of government, but should seek, if you like, to steer the development process. Steering the development process became, in the 60s and 70s, the main concern and focus of public administration. And there were degrees in development administration, and many of the schools, in fact, of public administration or centers around the world were called centers of development administration. Well, the strange thing that happened, and this I would like to underscore, is that there was this huge development around, first of all, an old concept of career approach to, serving the state, and a new approach to the functions that this career had to perform, namely not simply functions of routine functions or law and order functions, but also steering the economy of a country, because the public service and the state were considered the steam engines of the development effort. These twin concepts were turned on their heads as we moved from the 70s to the 80s, when, of course, the idea that government was the steam engine of progress fell flat on its face, if we can say that. And in fact, the government was seen as an obstacle to development, let alone a steam engine, as I said. That was one major change, which illustrates the fact that when we think of the development of our profession and the field which we are studying, we are not confronted with a linear progress. The progress has not been linear. It has been in leaps and bounds, but some of the leaps went backwards instead of forward. Whether this backwards meant to be a corrective or not, that's another issue. The fact of the matter is that everything, including our vocabulary, the terminology that we use in public administration, it allows the functions that we were asked to perform, and our mission were completely transformed. I remember it very well because I was a consultant in the Division of Public Administration. That's when I met Barry, and that's when I met Adil Khan, and that's when I met also ДЖОN-МЭРИ КАУЗИЯ. Suddenly, we no longer spoke of administration. Administration became management. Personnel administration became human resources development. And, I could repeat, I could, add more examples to this to illustrate this point. Many people at the beginning thought that, the words that were used were synonymous. But administration and management are not one and the same thing. Administration tries to project the idea, first of all, of law, and secondly, and equally, the administration of service. For those that have been familiar with the word minister, whether in the religious sense or in the political sense, they know that the minister is a servant, a first servant in a particular field in which he works. Manager, on the other hand, is a person who controls and who directs. Both, as I said, are words with a Latin origin, and that is what the origins suggest. And it was not only just the language that changed, because the methods of management were not those of public administration. Even in organizations like the United Nations, many concepts like participative administration, team building, thought to be central to the development effort, were, let us say, put in the back burner. They were not discarded, but they were not emphasized. And the administration was told that it had to adopt business models. Somehow business was considered to be good, and administration was considered bureaucracy, was equated, in fact, to bureaucracy. And that went on, in fact, for about 25 years, in spite of the depression that we started in 2008, and which could have prompted people to have second thoughts. It was the pandemic that nailed the coffin of this approach to management. Why? Because suddenly the countries in which, if you like, this model had been adopted almost across the board were found to be unprepared for the onslaught of the pandemic. It is not an accident that when the pandemic burst in March and April in New York City did not have enough hospital beds and enough PPPs and equipment, in other words, for protective equipment. It certainly did not have enough hospitals and equipment, ventilators, to take care of the patients. That was not an accident, because for years before, driven by primarily business-oriented ideas, many hospitals closed down their facilities. Two major hospitals in New York City were closed down. One was Doctor Hospital on the Upper East Side. The other was a beautiful hospital in the Village, which had done extremely good work in the fighting AIDS. And most of these facilities were no longer available. It taught us a lesson that we need to emphasize and to revalue certain missions of the public sector and of the public service that private enterprise cannot fulfill. And I want to complete, if you like, this short survey by noting and putting before you some of the things that only the government, and only, I would say, a strong government can do. One, of course, which is obvious, is the rule of law and due process. We are faced with a crisis in the United States, which is very much a crisis that touches on the rule of law and due process. This is the number one, perhaps, task of a government, I would consider it at least on a par, if not even higher than democracy. Democracy without the rule of law and due process ends up not being a democracy. The second very important function of a government that only the public and public service can defend is described very well by the expression leaving no one behind. In fact, what we have had under the new public management and the neoliberal business model is art for art's sake, government for government's sake. In the end, it ended up favoring the very rich and the very powerful, concentrating wealth and leaving many, many categories of citizens behind because nobody took care of them. Hospitals, which were not, hospitals, poor neighborhoods that were not properly equipped. Schools, a grave inequality in the level of schooling and education within the same city, within the city of New York. Your education is dependent on which school you go to, and that in turn, which district of the city you live in. And of course, categories like women, minorities, migrants that have been left behind because there was nobody there to speak for them and to advocate their rights. I think that this, as we move into this post-pandemic phase, we have to reinvent ourselves as public service professionals and maybe reinvent our profession. Our profession cannot be only training in the 3 E's. You remember, you've heard about the famous 3 E's, because ever since the beginning of this, the dawn of this century, we've been talking about the 3 E's, namely efficiency, effectiveness, and economy. Well, they are important, but they're not the most important. I would say there are at least 3 other E's that are extremely important and ought to be primacy. The first is, of course,
Can you just complete, because just the time.
I have 1 minute.
Okay.
The first is ethics, which is, of course, fighting against corruption, but also performing our mission in ethical ways. The second is, of course, equity, which means distributive justice. And the third is equality, which is one of the pillars of any democratic and proper rule of law system of government. And thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Argiriadis. So actually, due to your very, very huge experience, of course, right now you share with us your thesis and your proposals about the future of public administrations. And what I liked more just from your speech, that actually you call us just to reevaluate just because the revaluation is one of the important things, because every people, not only the government officials, but including just the people or citizens, that we have to think and evaluate our policy, our behavior. What is the more important in terms of the social policy, and what is more important in terms of the economic policies? And what is also very important, that you have mentioned about the rule of law, because without the law, and actually the democracy doesn't exist. Thank you very much for your very important speech. And actually, we actually do understand that due to this of the first of all, rule of law, the intellectual instrument like the citizens can engage for the sustainable development goals due to the intellectual and the government and the good governance especially, they have to be provided only by us and only in terms of like a big team. So it's only my expectations, because the forecasting and the future of our world doesn't exist or cannot exist without the integrity, without the transparency, because the Professor Demetrios right now had mentioned about the questions of the rule of war, and the rule of war, of course, it's no stop for the corruption, and actually it's also one of the sustainable development goals. So, and let me just stop for this note, because you know that I try to follow by our Facebook scenario, but there is no questions right for now. But there is a very, very important message that some of our colleagues, of course, they agree with your concept, Adil, Professor Adil Khan, because it's very important that without, we have to pay attention for the disparities, just we have to pay attention for the education and the intellectual role. Thank you very much for for today's discussions, and of course we share all of your presentations and have the sharing of this. We have saved this session for the SafeBook, and if you would like, just if you definitely will need, we can share the note footnote for today's session with each of you. Thank you very much, and I hope that actually the Academy of Public Administrations under the President of Republic of Kazakhstan will continue our cooperation with all of you, and please tell